Welcome to We the People, a new birth of freedom. Please feel free to subscribe and leave your comments below. I'll get back to you. We've been talking about the Declaration of Independence. Let's look at those two words for a minute. The Declaration of Independence. Declaration and Independence. Why make a declaration of independence? Why? What's the purpose? What's the objective? What's the goal? What's the vision? Wasn't being subjective to the King of Britain and his laws and legislation and rules and regulation, wasn't that sufficient? Weren't they taken care of? Weren't they provided for? Did they not wake up every day with food and shelter and clothing? I'm sure they did. But they began to see the abuses, the tyranny, and the usurpations that were connected to a king and his servants, a dictator and his subordinates, a pharaoh and his slaves. And in their research and observations, as they went all down through history and saw how those characteristics play out, they begin to realize and tap into the simplistic but profound mysteries of what life, liberty, justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness actually represented. And they discovered in their research, in their observations, that the king's law did not exemplify true life, true liberty, and justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness only as he defined it. And so they suddenly realized that liberty and life is defined within each of us, inside of us. Our own biology and psychology and spirituality is what defines true life, true liberty, justice, equality, the pursuit of happiness. The uniformity, the more perfect union, the established justice in our sovereign biology and psychology and spirituality is where they discovered that is where the truths lie. And so they understood that these things come by the laws of nature and nature's God, and not by political legislation and regulation and rules and statutes. Those were man-made, but the laws of nature govern all of us. It's not politics that creates a human being. It's not political legislation that gives you your intelligence that you're born with. It does not provide you the reasoning and the logic and the skills and the competence to smell, to see, to hear, to taste, to touch. It doesn't develop those acute skills inside of you. They look to the laws of nature for the truth rather than the king's personal likes and dislikes, his desires and the things that his own vision of what he wanted to establish in his empire. You see, these are man-made. They begin to see that everything man-made has limitations. They begin to understand that man's laws, under tyranny, dictatorship, totalitarian ideologies, the person implementing those things, they want all the freedom. They want to enjoy all the affluence that comes with living. They want to enjoy the unlimited freedoms and liberty. They want to enjoy the equality, but they want to limit their subjects, their servants, their slaves, so they can't enjoy it the way they are. So they decided, you know what, we're not going to be a slave anymore to human policy, to human politics, human legislation. We're going to look within inside of us and realize that life, liberty, justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness is intrinsic inside of us. So they made a declaration. We're going to separate ourselves from the political bands that limit these things in the context of life and liberty. We're not anti-government. Our founding fathers were not anarchists. They were not anti-government. They were just anti-corrupt government. They were anti-tyranny government. They were anti-dictatorship government. They were simply anti-totalitarian government. They were anti-political correctness according to man-made policies government. So they embarked on their path of being outlaws and fugitives and criminals, and they went to war for this independence. Gallons and gallons and gallons of blood was shed, as you've heard me state in prior videos, for independence, for sovereign independence, not only as a nation, but as individuals, we the people who make up this nation called America. And so they said, we hold these truths, Jefferson wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident. This was not a Supreme Court decision. This was not a political party's decision in the context of a declaration of independence. This was not some hieroglyphics found on a cave wall that they were trying to interpret. This was not some sonnet, some Shakespearean sonnet. This was not just poetry or theory. These truths were self-evident in our biology, psychology, and spirituality. For example, it's not theory that when a live sperm, unites with a live egg, that life is conceived. That's not a theory. That's an actuality. It takes place every day. It's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. That's not a theory. That's an actuality. That's not an incidental. That's a fundamental element of life. It's not something in our peripheral view. It's a fact right before our very eyes. It manifests, it reveals itself on a daily basis. These truths that are self-evident lay within inside of us. And so when that sperm unites with the egg, what happens? It begins to form a more perfect union. Perfect in this context is not flawless. Perfect simply means completeness. A sperm by itself is not complete. An egg by itself is not complete. But when united together to do what the laws of nature has designed them to do, it begins to form a more perfect union in the development of a human being. You heard me say in the prior video that life, some people believe life begins at conception. It actually begins before conception. Someone gave me a question, which was a very good question, whether I was talking about something determined as good or evil. We're not talking about good and evil in this context right now. We're talking about life itself. Life begins before conception. If a sperm is dead and an egg is dead, you can't get life. It's impossible. But if a sperm is alive and an egg is alive, once they unite, those two live elements, the sperm and the egg, begin to form a more complete union of cells, a multiplication and a unionization of cells in the process of a human being developing. They ask another very good question about where does consciousness begin? Well, life itself contains its own characteristic of consciousness. Conscious is simply defined as a knowledge of what to do, where to go, what to become. It's an awareness. And so life itself has built within it its own consciousness, because that human sperm and that human egg, the consciousness that's already inherent in that life force, knows to begin to develop cells for a human being. And those cells are conscious of a human development. You know, at some point in the development and the multiplication of cells, they don't suddenly take a right or left turn and decide, well, we're going to make a frog or a flower. No. The built-in, inherent, intrinsic consciousness already in the cellular development, in the life force, knows which direction it needs to go, knows how to arrange those cells. So really, consciousness is intrinsic to genetics. It's built in, it's embedded there. It's part of life. And so the egg represents liberty. The sperm represents life. And once that sperm, life, unites with the egg provides the liberty for the life in that sperm to begin to multiply. And that's why when you read the preambles to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the preamble to the Bill of Rights, and there is one, the wording itself reflects biology, life, multiplication, cellular development, a more perfect union, a more complete union. It talks about posterity, which is the product of a sperm and an egg. It's future generations. And that's why I contend that abortion without justification, and I'm talking about absolute justification, not to engage in pleasure and just decide I don't want this and kill it. But abortion is unconstitutional without constitutional justification. Just like a police officer takes the life of an individual, that homicide has to be justified constitutionally before he can be cleared of homicide. Everything we do has to have a clear-cut constitutional justification in order for it to be in the context of life, liberty, justice, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. And this is something that politicians are so blinded to for the most part. Their whole life is wrapped up in politics, political correctness, legislation, totalitarianism, Marxism, communism, Nazism, socialism, some kind of ism out there, rather than the truth or the truths that's contained in the laws of nature and nature's God. Until next time, I certainly encourage you and hope to inspire you to simply be a true American.